Establishing a constructive climate. Today we're looking at climate in the context of a team or organization and taking a deeper dive into the 4 factors that you should consider when you are establishing a constructive climate and communicating about it. As we go through, think about teams that have worked well or not so well in the past and how you can establish constructive climate in your teams now, perhaps in this class even, and later on in your work life. In addition to be able to identify the 4 factors to consider for a constructive climate, you'll also need to be able to discuss why that's important. One of my goals here for you is that you'll be able to know what a constructive climate looks like and how that relates to culture. And we'll also talk about groupthink. And some of what we discussed here is only in the lecture and not in the textbook, as well as one of my favorite text topics, which is communicating feedback. Climate is people's shared perceptions, and this includes people's general thoughts and feelings about the activities, assumptions, procedures of a group. These things may fluctuate. A constructive climate is just that, an atmosphere that promotes group members' satisfaction and achieving their personal best. But beyond having satisfied and well-performing members, there's another reason for leaders to build a constructive climate in their workplace. There's a 2015 book called The Optimistic Workplace, and the author, Sean Murphy, writes, quote, "People in positive work environments outperform those in negative work climates by 10 to 30%, unquote. A leader at every level in an organization will impact climate. Culture is deeper in the organization. It takes a lot longer to change. Climate is a byproduct of the culture, but it's going to be more flexible. An organization's culture develops over longer periods from many interactions within the group or organization. A culture is reinforced by organizational members who have developed patterns of working together over time." The 4 factors for establishing a constructive climate are providing structure, clarifying norms, building cohesiveness, and promoting standards of excellence. Let's look at each of these in a little more detail. Providing structure is much like giving group members an architectural blueprint. Instilling structure provides people with a sense of security, direction, stability. A leader can provide that structure by communicating the goals of a group. The answer to what are we doing here and why? So this harkens back to vision and mission statements in Chapter 7, right? People want to know why they are doing something, how they're accomplishing it. Another key thing that a leader can do is work for synergy. I know that's such a jargony word, but really it's important here. By identifying the unique ways that each individual member can contribute to the group, synergy can be achieved. And that's when the group outcome is greater than the sum of the individual contributions. So a leader can identify strengths, like we've talked about, and then assign and communicate different roles and goals to help achieve this. When people have clear roles, it can help clarify everyone's place in the organization and how they can contribute to the goals. Norms are the rules of behavior that are established and shared by group members. Norms are important. They are artifacts, and it's academic jargon there, but artifacts that point to what the organization values. Norms show what are appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Norms don't emerge on their own. These are the outcome of people interacting with each other and with the leader. They are an outcome of how leaders treat followers and how followers treat each other. Now, it can be tricky as a newcomer to learn these. It is hard even if you've been there for a while. Often these things are assumed or quote-unquote understood, and they're not usually verbally articulated by anyone. So let's say you're working at a new place and there's a work fridge that is stocked with soda. Can you take one? Do you know? Yeah, that's one of those things. It might be a norm. It might be a policy. It might be that John's fine with sharing the sodas. It might be that the sodas were purchased for everyone. It might be that John has sodas and you better not touch it. So you can see how little things like that, which are kind of on the verge of politics, but little things like that can influence how people will see you in an organization. Now, I've been talking about norms as behaviors, but as researchers have noted, organizations have important norms company-wide and at the group level. There are norms about who says what, to whom, when, through what channel, for what duration, by what decision procedure. For example, can you call your boss on her home phone number to chat for an hour? I would say I have 2 employees who do that, and that's fine with our relationship, but there's other people I really don't want that to happen. So it can violate norms. You could even see somebody doing it and think it's okay to do it, but it's not okay for anyone. It's okay for now I'm talking about someone specific. It's okay for Professor McCready to call me and do that because I have known her since 2007. It is not okay for some other random person I've just met to call and do that. We don't have that relationship. We don't know each other's kids. So you could be an outsider, observe that, think it's a communication norm, but it's not. There are 3 types of norms: pivotal, relevant, and peripheral. Pivotal norms are behaviors that must be followed to stay in an organization. These types of norms, they should be, but they're not often, but they can be explicitly stated in a policy or a handbook. For example, you don't come to work high or intoxicated or have alcohol in your desk. You don't routinely miss work. You show up on time. What does missing work even mean? Relevant norms, on the other hand, are less likely to be written down. Violating them doesn't mean you'll be fired or expelled from the organization, but not following the norms will limit your success on the company. That could be perhaps not coming into the office and working from home on Friday. Maybe you're allowed to do that, but people might be walking by being like, hey, why is this person never there? And that can increase or decrease, in that case, it would decrease opportunities for promotions and raises. How would you know? Peripheral norms are behavior patterns that are rarely written down, and they're the least important to learn, but they matter too. They have consequences, they're just more minor. So for example, you go into a meeting and you sit in somebody's spot at that table. It can cause confusion, it could cause joking, and I know in our book it talks about this being a minimal pushback, but I would really encourage you not to do that. Because what if something else is going on in that person's life? So we're going back to relational leadership here, but what if something else is going on and then they're offended and then they're going to be ruder in their communication in the meeting? Just watch for it. They're not going to be written down, but knowing that's Jane's seat can matter. So as a leader, you can influence norms in your group, your organization, your community, your workplace, and there's a few things to keep in mind. First, understand how they develop. So norms are going to develop over time. You're going to walk into them anywhere you go. They stem from expectations of how to behave based on previous experience. Actions are likely to become norms if they happen early in a group's history, or if somebody high status is performing them. These behaviors become norms when they are repeated and either reinforced as positive or not explicitly rejected. A leader has an opportunity to influence norms intentionally, especially at the beginning of a project, by doing the other 3 behaviors you see listed here: explicit discussion, reinforcement and sanctioning, and modeling behaviors. Second, you need to shape a norm through explicit discussion of it. So sometimes a leader can draw attention to a norm that's violated and discuss it. So perhaps you send out an email saying, hey, just so everybody knows, those were John's sodas in the fridge. That can help a group understand behavior. It can make it clearer. That would really make it easier on everyone. A 2003 study found that when a norm of communicate regularly wasn't being performed by the group members, identifying that and specifying the norm with check email daily, report in a monthly meeting, whatever that is, can shape the normative behavior for the group. So you can, as a leader, go in, recognize an issue, and change it. Now, especially if the norms are pivotal or relevant, the leader needs to clarify them to the team and make them constructive as much as possible. So if you have a team where it seems like people are not communicating with each other, maybe you've had this in team projects, and things are getting missed. As a leader, and I would again encourage you, in a team project, anyone can step up and take this leadership role. You might want to start stressing the importance of team debriefings. By doing that communication step, you'll verbally indicate that people should value knowing what's going on with other people's roles. You could further model that in your interactions by asking people, how are things going? Give a status update. Leaders can also discuss specifying these behaviors or figuring out how to clarify the norm with followers. Involve them in the process of changing norms that are hindering the group. That's why perhaps if you're having norms for a class, you might have a discussion about what's vague, what's more concrete in terms of how can we manage behavior around people we're not in charge of in a team project. You want to positively reinforce those who follow norms and sanction those who don't if self-correction is not happening. If self-correction is happening, I would encourage you to let it go. There's just too much to manage otherwise. This is going to increase the pressure to conform. We'll talk more about in-groups and out-groups. But positive reinforcement is specifically praising behaviors you want to be the norms. So thanking for people arriving on time to a meeting and being ready to start. Sanctions might not be an explicit don't do that. I mean, groups can usually wait for people to self-correct after first violating a norm. A lot of norm enforcement comes from people self-monitoring, reading the room, noticing their behavior is inconsistent, and changing that. Now, if self-correction doesn't happen, people might joke about the norm behavior to draw attention to it, but then they may make fun of the person directly. And if that continues, it is going to lead to arguments and exclusion and dysfunction in the workplace. Long term, it will get toxic. So you want to be really careful here that we are communicating effectively about what norms are. Given the words applied to part of this process, sanctions, positive reinforcement, self-correction, it sounds a little serious maybe, but I want to take an example of how this looks with a scenario. So a group member, and I'm just going to venture, this will happen to some of you in your team projects this semester, but we have somebody in a department, we'll stick with work, a group member in your work department is missing deadlines. First time, bit of a pass. Leader of the group will wait to see, is it a one-time thing? And the individual self-corrects. You're giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Second time, maybe someone makes a joke. Oh, I used to miss deadlines in college. I outgrew that when I got a real job. And that lets the individual know their lapse is noticed. If a third sanction is necessary, it might escalate with a little bit more pointed humor. So, too many late nights out to make your deadline, huh? Fourth time, that's where it could escalate into an argument. You missing the deadlines makes our team look bad and throws off my work schedule. If the bad behavior continues, it'll probably move to exclusion. So group members will limit communication with that person, skip having lunch with them, stop offering solutions. The leader might assign work to others or become increasingly frustrated. Now, as a leader, you might let the group sanction others a little bit, but please step in when you start to see this happening. This is going so far. It is, for me, I was uncomfortable with time number 2, but when it gets to the exclusion point, good luck coming back from that within your organization. Think of that person who finally turns in their part on a written document after using the cliche ghosting, after ghosting you for a long time. Were you happy that person finally did something, or were you kind of irritated? Are you going to give them a crucial part in your final presentation or a good evaluation at work? Well, no. So this matters. The pressure to conform to norms, now remember, is not the same across norms or individuals. So some norms will have a wider range of what's acceptable, and people are going to respond to sanctions differently. There's a lot of people where that humor would not fit. And other people might make jokes about that, but it's not a sanction. It's just really a joke. So I'd encourage super clear communication here. Status also impacts expectations of following norms. For norms explicitly tied to values of an organization, high status people are expected to follow them closely. But a high-powered person may also be allowed to not follow some norms that others are expected to, like, for example, showing up on Fridays and keeping the door open instead of working from home. This kind of pass might not be acceptable in someone of lower status, but acceptable in a higher status individual. Not that I'd recommend it, though. All right, so modeling behaviors is the final way that a leader can influence norms. So if you want everyone to arrive 5 minutes early for meetings, do it. It'll signal to your followers that this is your expectation, and they will fall in line, usually. The third factor in establishing a constructive climate is building cohesiveness. So this is that we-ness of a group, a bond. Members identify with the group and its goal and find satisfaction in being an accepted member of the group. You might have felt this as part of a student organization, or especially if you're in the military, and I'm sure a lot of you too, as part of a work team. Frequently we get this we-ness, it's a strange word, but the we-ness towards our college or university post-graduation, where you look back and feel like, oh, that was a place where I felt like I kind of belonged. Cohesion can have a lot of positive outcomes. You'll see them listed here, but increased participation, better interaction, membership tends to be more consistent, and there's satisfaction in all of these as well. So as a leader, you can do things. And again, leaders, well, I keep repeating this from earlier chapters, but leaders from any point in the organization, you don't have to be the boss, but leaders can build cohesiveness by helping groups to create a climate of trust. And this is essential. Research shows that organizations with trusting climates tend to be more productive, creative, competitive, and effective. And you trust in your climate, you're generally going to have happier and more committed employees. You will feel that way as well. And those people can then maybe, even be expected to go beyond their job description to help others. So if a leader creates a trusting environment, that can boost performance by fostering teamwork, cooperation, and risk-taking, increasing the flow and quality of information, and improving problem solving. So leaders can do this by communicating, keyword here, communicating high expectations. And it's communicating expectations for competence, openness, honesty, empathy, reliability, and identification. So that means letting your followers, or even letting a team where you're not the leader, know, here's what our goal is. Here's what matters to me in this. And you can build that cohesiveness by inviting group members to become active participants and encouraging passive and withdrawn members to become more involved. And this can be tough. I will tell you, so you might have a team where one person is pretty consistently maybe not lived up to standards, and then it's hard as a leader to still go back to that person and say, hey, passive withdrawn member, will you buy in here? Will you do something? But even the asking can create buy-in. I mean, is that a lot of work as a leader? Yes. Can it increase productivity and happiness of your other employees? Also yes. So leaders should be also willing to listen and accept your group members for who they are. That goes back to the strengths idea. Everyone in the group is going to be different, and rather than valuing uniformity, you'll generally have a stronger and more cohesive group if you can accept their various strengths and help them achieve their goals. Leaders should build a climate where people feel safe expressing divergent viewpoints, and we'll talk about more of that with the concept of groupthink. And finally, you want to allow group members to share leadership responsibilities and foster member-to-member interaction. This should not only be leader to follower. Now, this might look a little familiar back to the first chapters with the non-theory X, non-authoritarian leadership philosophy and style. And that's because those types of leaders traditionally do value group cohesiveness. If all this sounds a little funny to you, you might go back and look at your self-assessment results and think, well, maybe this is something I could pull in. So this sounds cool, right? Cohesiveness, yay. What could go wrong? Oh, it's groupthink. This can be very bad and really dangerous and costly for businesses. It's possible for a group to get too cohesive. When group members become extremely close, they can develop a closed mindset called groupthink, where they value unanimity over critical appraisal of alternate ideas or viewpoints. You hopefully have heard maybe about this concept in other classes, and if not, well, I guess hearing multiple times can be okay. This is not part of the textbook, so you do want to take notes here, but I'm going to cover the 8 symptoms or signs of groupthink. I'm going to divide them into 3 main categories: signs of overconfidence, closed-mindedness, and group pressure. All right, let's start with overconfidence. These are the illusion of invulnerability. So when most or all group members are overly optimistic, they take huge risks and belief in the inherent morality of the group. And these members might ignore the ethical consequences of their actions and choices because they believe that their group is inherently ethical and would not do something wrong. So for example, you have an HR organization that is fluffing up the numbers because they believe they're doing the right thing and they're a tight team, when really what they're doing is fraud. And I'll say I've seen this actually happen in an HR group where they were doing something that was not legal, but they thought they could press forward. Second, the signs of close-mindedness include collective rationalization. So this is when members rationalize or downplay information or warnings that challenge their decisions or assumptions. This is also called maladaptive sense-making. So they're ignoring information that contradicts their mental model. And stereotypes of outside groups. So this is where members view out-group members as evil or stupid, and they also underestimate others' capabilities. Maybe you've had this happen at work where you hear somebody being like, oh my gosh, that accounting department, why are they all so dumb? Well, accounting department perhaps has become an out-group in your organization. And you can see, well, hopefully you can see how that's just really not very productive. The last four behaviors all fall under the signs of group pressure. So this will be pressure on dissenters, in which some members coerce dissenting members to go with the main opinion. So it's forcing a democratic leadership style in a really undemocratic way. Self-censorship, when doubting individuals don't speak up about doubts or encounter arguments. That means there would be an illusion of unanimity. When members think the lack of voiced conflicting opinions means everybody agrees. But that's not everybody agreeing. That's pressure and self-censorship. And finally, we have self-appointed mind guards. So there will be members who perhaps in a group will protect, I hate that, but they protect the leader from dissenting opinions that could counter the consensus of the group. So I've been sitting on the slide. This is actually the solution to all of this. So you've probably read ahead by this point. But there's a lot of factors that contribute to groupthink. So group isolation, time pressures, similarity of members. But leadership can be a big factor here. So you can imagine if the leader is the one saying, oh, that accounting department's so dumb, that communication can really push everybody who's following in a specific direction. And another example, leaders pushing for a specific solution might cut off discussion and limit the number of alternatives given back to you in a brainstorming session. Leaders, though, can have a big role in preventing groupthink by not expressing a preference for a certain choice or solution, hold it back, urge members to deliberate, consider a variety of alternatives. Ask people to critically evaluate choices. Sometimes I'll give people time as well as an anonymous way to give feedback if it seems like something where people might need to. One thing I'm going to try but have not yet is this concept where you can even appoint a devil's advocate. So ask someone in the group, perhaps you have a detractor in your group from the project that you're working on, ask them to argue the other position. That gives them a chance to be involved. It gives them a chance to flex that strength of criticism and analysis. I'll say that as a leader, it's a little scary, right? But those voices can be overwhelming and discouraging. But if you can do this correctly, it could be really exciting. You can invite experts to weigh in, so perhaps identify who in your group might have special information. You can break up the group to work in subgroups. So for example, for classes, I have the faculty now broken up into subgroups on the different business communication classes. We work, or I have them act as leaders within that, so it's leadership from below. And then we come back together as a team to negotiate difference and talk about improvement. There's a lot more to this. This is just a good starting place to give you some ideas of how, if you are in a leadership position, you can use your communication strategies to allow dissenting opinions, different thoughts, other opinions to have a place at the table. This is another sort of fun example. Jeff Bezos, and everybody knows who he is, right, has a unique way of attempting this, or attempting to avoid it, which is what he calls the 2-pizza rule. The idea is, if you have a meeting and you order 2 pizzas, is there enough for everybody to get a couple slices? If not, if there's not enough pizza, then your group is too big. When the group gets too big, you will promote groupthink. People will not speak back to you. I'll tell you as a leader, if I ever need to do a really big meeting with, let's say, like 30 faculty members, once I get to that big of a group, so we cannot share 2 pizzas, people don't say anything to me. So I have to be careful to get feedback from people beforehand and then bring in their feedback in the meeting. Because once you get to a larger than 2 pizza group, people are going to shut down. In video activity 8.2, Northhouse talks about how if he had to pick one factor of the 4 factors of establishing constructive climate for a class, it would be cohesiveness. It keeps people together, supportive of each other. When group members are cohesive, they're more productive. And while building cohesiveness takes skill, you've heard a lot of ways to do that. But most of them rely on you and your followers be on person. So what do you do if you're virtual, like we are right now for some classes? For those of you who are working, how do you do it in the workplace? What can you do as a group member in these arenas to build cohesiveness in your upcoming projects and in other classes? Particularly as we move into an environment that's going to incorporate on-campus as well as off-campus activities for everyone. It's a big, interesting question that more research will definitely be done on. And finally, we come to the last factor, which is promoting standards of excellence. The book talks about a 1989 study of 75 highly successful teams. It's a good one. They spent almost 3 years conducting this study and interviewed key members of teams in diverse areas and turned it into a groundbreaking book. In there, they identify 8 strategies they think are essential to team performance. Standards of excellence is one of those strategies. You might go check out the book if you're interested. But a quick review of what the standards of excellence are. So these are standards that are the expressed and implied expectations for performance that exist within a group or an organization. A simple standard of excellence that you are all familiar with is grades, grade point average. Johnson and Hackman, 2 really important scholars, found that successful teams have high expectations regarding outcomes. So you might have an expectation for your GPA, you might not, and those are the kinds of things that we use to define acceptable performance. There's 6 factors that are essential for members to function effectively, and you'll see these on your screen here. It's one, first off, knowing what group members need to know, what skills do they need to acquire. Good performance reviews can help a lot with that. How much initiative and effort they need to demonstrate, how you're expected to treat each other, deadlines, goals, and consequences. These are standards that need to be clearly articulated. And I'd encourage you, and this is kind of off the book a little bit, but if you can combine this back with the strengths model and set high expectations rather than waiting until things are wrong to tell people that it is just okay or wrong, you're going to have a much more successful team because they understand what the standards are. Telling people what the standards are after they've spent a year working there, that's really not fair to anyone. It's going to build resentment. So to influence performance, the authors, we're going to go back to Johnson and Hackman, actually contend the leader needs to stress what they call 3 R's. So requiring results, reviewing results, and rewarding results. So this means, and I just mentioned early on, articulating clear, concrete expectations for your team. They're going to reduce uncertainty. They'll know what's expected. They'll be able to work on the task, and they'll be able to work together more effectively. Feedback is really important here. So constructive feedback can allow group members to look at themselves honestly, to know what to maintain or improve, and resolve performance issues. As part of reviewing the results, I really encourage you that you ask people you manage, once you get to that point, to give you their own feedback on themselves. Ask them what they think of their own performance. Get them involved in setting this. This is going to be a much more cohesive process if you can do that. There are really good ways to give constructive feedback during this process. So one is that you might think about addressing behaviors rather than the individual. So it's not you are a bad person. That's harsh. You're really doing a bad job. Doesn't really help people. But if you want to focus instead on, say, meeting deadlines or the quality of reports, that is something where people can get better. Use I language. So you did this and you did that. Let's try it this way. Your slides were just not very good. When really, it's somebody's personal preference. If I said to you, your slides are, you can say this to me about this slide, it's not that awesome. But if you said, your slides are not very good, it's going to feel like a personal attack. People will get defensive. Instead, if you said, I really like when slides have more citations on them. That's a calm, unemotional way that gives people a way to move forward and do better next time. You really want to be sure when you do this, you check to ensure clear communication has occurred with specific questions, not just, you know what I mean? But asking them, can I give you any more information about slides? Could I give you a sample of what I think a better slide would look like in this situation? And rewarding results. Now this should be fun, but this is a much more practical, straightforward process, something that every leader can do. One thing I will point out though, and I know as I do this lecture over a series of years, this is going to change, but in years where there is economic downturn, which means people aren't being rewarded for performance financially, be sure to reward your team verbally. So this can be recognizing and appreciating contributions, expressing appreciation for individual excellence. Earlier in the semester, we talked about just writing a thank you note. When a leader recognizes group members and gives encouragement, they're going to feel more people will feel more valued. They'll feel like there's a greater sense of group identity. They'll feel like there's more community spirit. So I'd encourage you to take a moment and ask yourself, so how comfortable are you when you're Confronting inadequate performance by group members. What skills do you need to develop to do this more effectively? We've all been in a group with a dead weight, a member or multiple members, somebody who doesn't have their part done on time, doesn't show up to meetings, doesn't respond to text, or perhaps takes on a project and doesn't do well. It's not fun. It's frustrating. And so you really want to start thinking now about your strategies for confronting behavior and how you can improve your teams now and later when you are the team leader and communicating what climate means, what culture means, how to avoid groupthink, and providing really good feedback.